It was one of those rare evenings when the fire had sunk low and Holmes appeared content to let silence reign between us. I had my chair drawn close to the hearth, the newspaper folded upon my knee, when that curious sound came again. A slow, hollow knocking, faint yet distinct, as though someone rapped upon the inside of our very wall. Holmes raised one finger. "You hear it too, Watson?" I nodded, the sound continuing, 3 deliberate strokes, then stillness. It seemed to come not from the corridor, but deeper, muffled and resonant, like a plea trapped behind brick. Holmes leaned forward, eyes alight. "That, my dear fellow, is not a rat nor a loose board. It is intention." Before I could reply, there came a brisk knock at the door, this time unmistakably human. Mrs. Hudson entered, her face pale. "A gentleman to see you, sir. He says it is urgent." The visitor was shown in, a tall man with ash upon his coat and a look of sleepless anxiety. His hat trembled in his hand. "You are Mr. Sherlock Holmes? I must apologize for the hour." "Never mind the hour," said Holmes. "Pray, take the chair nearest the light." The stranger obeyed, glancing uneasily toward the very wall from which the hollow knocking had come. "My name is Tobias Hearn," he began. "I live at number 7 Beecham Street. For 3 nights I've heard it. The same knocking, always from the inside of my study wall. And tonight I heard a voice." Holmes's gaze sharpened. "A voice, you say?" Hearn swallowed. "Yes, a whisper that said my name." I felt a chill despite the fire's warmth. Could it be some trick of the ear? The wind through a pipe, perhaps? He shook his head vehemently. "I'm not an imaginative man, Doctor. I sealed every vent, checked the flue, even examined the plaster. But the knocking continued, and the whisper followed." Holmes leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Describe your house, Mr. Hearn." "Old construction?" "Early Georgian. My father's before mine. The study was once a servant's room, walled in 50 years ago when the corridor was altered." "The servant's room," murmured Holmes. "Curious, and this sound began 3 nights ago. Precisely when?" "Close upon 11. "Ah." Holmes's eyes flicked to the clock upon our mantel, its hands now resting at 10 minutes to 11. "Then, if the pattern holds, we may have a demonstration within the hour." Hearn gripped his knees. "You mean, you intend to come?" "I mean," said Holmes, rising to fetch his coat, "that we shall listen." The wind outside moaned faintly down Baker Street as we stepped into the hansom. Within minutes, the gas lamps thinned and the darker quarters of Marylebone swallowed us. I could hear that hollow rhythm still in my mind, 3 slow knocks, and wondered whether imagination or echo carried it. Hearner's house stood narrow between 2 others, its facade respectable but damp-stained. He led us in with a shaking hand and a whisper, "The sound comes from here." The study was small, panelled in oak, with a writing desk before a shuttered window. Holmes struck a match, lighting a single lamp. The air smelled faintly of mould and something else. Old smoke, perhaps. He ran his fingers along the wall, tapping lightly. "Hollow," he murmured, "but that is not the mystery." "Not the wall?" I asked. "No? The rhythm. Listen." He struck 3 taps with his knuckle, precisely the cadence we had heard in Baker Street. Then, from somewhere within that same wall, the same pattern answered. Hearn gasped, recoiling. "Good God, it knows the sound." Holmes's expression did not change, but I saw his eyes narrow with fascination. "Watson," he said softly, "observe how each interval aligns with the beat of a human pulse." Before I could answer, there came a faint, drawn-out whisper through the wood. Low, but unmistakable. "Tobias." Hearn staggered back against the desk, face ashen. The lamp flame quivered as though the wall itself exhaled. Holmes stepped closer, ear pressed to the panel. "The voice, Watson. Record its tone in your mind. You will hear it again. Then, without warning, the knocking ceased. Only the clock on the mantel ticked, each stroke loud as a heartbeat. Holmes turned sharply to Hearn. "Has anyone had reason to wish you harm?" "No, no one I know." "Then we must assume," said Holmes, "that this message is not intended to frighten, but to be found." The lamp flickered once more and went out. In the sudden dark, that hollow knocking resumed, slow, patient, and impossibly near. "Holmes," I cried. "Quiet, Watson." His voice came steady through the gloom. "We are not alone in this room." The sound seemed to travel, beneath the floorboards, up behind the walls, circling us like something trapped and sentient. Holmes's hand found my arm. "Hold the light steady when I say the word. The source is not beyond the wall. It is within the house itself." And then came a single, deliberate stroke, this time from the inside of the locked cupboard beside Hearn's desk. Holmes whispered, "There, Watson, our guest has knocked from inside." Holmes's whisper hung between us as the last vibration of that knock trembled through the wood. He moved first, swiftly but without noise, his lantern flaring a thin stripe across the cupboard door. Hearn stood frozen beside the desk, both hands pressed to his mouth. "Step back, Watson," Holmes murmured. "Let us verify whether our guest is flesh or fancy." The cupboard was locked with an iron latch. Holmes produced a narrow blade from his pocket and slid it neatly beneath. The latch lifted with a dry click. For an instant, nothing stirred. Then he pulled the door wide. The hollow inside was empty, shelves bare but for a cluster of dust and a faint mark upon the back panel where the grain had been rubbed smooth. Holmes bent close, struck the panel with 2 knuckles, and listened. The echo came back soft, almost breathing. "Plaster over timber," he said, "a concealed recess, perhaps 3 feet deep." Hearn's voice shook. "Then, someone could be inside it." Holmes straightened. "Possible, but unlikely. The sound is too resonant for a body in confinement. No, Mr. Hearn, whatever produced that knocking is behind the recess, not within it." He pressed his ear to the surface again, eyes half closed. "There it is. Do you hear, Watson?" I strained to listen. Beneath the hush of the room came that same dull, patient rhythm. 3 taps, a pause, then a faint scraping, as though fingers sought an exit. Holmes lifted his hand abruptly, silencing us. "Observe the cadence. 1, 2, 3, pause, and then movement. That is deliberate communication." Hearn staggered back. "From whom?" "From someone who believes himself unheard," Holmes replied, "and who, if I am correct, has been heard far too well." He called for the butler, a stooped man named Pierce, who entered blinking under the lantern glare. "When was this room last altered?" Holmes asked. Pierce frowned. "Long before my time, sir. They say it used to lead into the adjoining house, but the passage was walled when the owner next door died." "Died?" Holmes repeated softly. "Fell, sir. From his own landing, they said." Holmes's gaze flicked to me. "Another layer of brick between neighbors, Watson. Yet the sound travels still. You see the paradox?" I did, though uneasily. Then the knocking might come through from the other house. Precisely the direction I proposed to test. Within minutes, we stood in the damp night air again, the oral motif continuing in my imagination like a pulse beneath the cobbles. Hearn's neighbor lived in a shuttered residence, its windows black, its door chained. A faded signboard read, "For Let." Holmes tried the gate. It yielded with a creak. "Abandoned," I murmured. "Abandoned above ground, perhaps," said he. Inside, our footsteps echoed against emptiness. The air carried the stale tang of coal dust. Holmes held his lantern to the wall adjoining Hearn's study. The plaster bore a faint bulge where damp had warped it. He tapped once, "Thock," and from behind came the answering knock, knock, knock. Hearn gasped aloud. "There! It follows us!" Holmes wheeled toward him. "It does not follow. It emanates. The wall itself is the instrument." He took a thin blade from his cane, wedged it under the plaster, and drew it down with surgical care. Dust sifted out. Behind the plaster lay brickwork, but one brick near the center bore a small hole, fresh, round, and dark at the edges. "Burned," Holmes muttered. "A candle's flame, perhaps, or a wire heated and drawn through. Someone has tampered recently." He inserted a slender probe and twisted gently. A click sounded, and a fragment of mortar fell away, revealing a small iron grill concealed beneath. Through it came a whisper of cool air, and then, unmistakably, the sound, knock, knock, knock. Hearn's face blanched. What could live behind that? Holmes's tone was crisp. "No living thing, Mr. Hearn. Only a message left by one. Watson, your handkerchief." He wrapped the cloth around his fingers and drew out the grill. Behind it lay a narrow cavity extending into darkness. Holmes slid the lantern close. For an instant, we saw a scrap of yellowed parchment caught against a splinter. He plucked it free with tweezers. Written upon it in faded ink were 3 words. "I am here." Hearn's voice broke into a whisper. "Good God, man! Who?" Holmes folded the note carefully. "Someone imprisoned or pretending to be. Either way, a hand has reached through time to stir your conscience." The wind moaned softly through the broken hole, repeating the phrase in a ghostly cadence. I felt my nerves tighten. "Holmes, do you imply a living prisoner?" "Hardly, but the message is meant for a particular eye and ear. Tell me, Mr. Hearn, who occupied this house before it was let?" "My father's business partner," he said slowly. "Mr. Garrick, he took his own life here." "And the partnership ended amicably?" Hearn hesitated. "There were disputes. The accounts were never reconciled." Holmes's expression hardened. "Then we may have stumbled upon the echo of unfinished guilt rather than a haunting. A man conceals a secret. His walls remember it." He turned back to the hole, listening again. "Hear that, Watson? The interval shortens. Someone or something draws our attention deliberately now." The knocking grew sharper, as if the unseen hand struck with urgency. Each stroke carried through my ribs. Holmes raised a palm. "Enough. We withdraw for tonight. The pattern is set. Tomorrow we shall bring daylight and tools." Hearn caught his arm. "You mean to leave it, whatever it is? Still knocking?" Holmes regarded him with cool sympathy. "For now, yes. The truth is best caught when it believes itself unobserved." As we stepped back into the chill air, the final sound that followed us through the corridor was not a knock, but a faint, dragging scrape, like something being drawn slowly away from the wall. Holmes paused on the threshold, eyes bright beneath his hat brim. "Watson," he said, "when a message refuses to cease, it is not the sender but the listener who holds the key." The door shut behind us, and through the heavy oak came a single, hollow knock from somewhere impossibly near the center of the house. Holmes did not speak as we crossed the lamplit pavement. His stride was measured, his head bent slightly forward as though he listened still to the echo behind us. I could hear it too, the solitary knock that lingered in imagination long after the air had gone still. Inside the cab, Holmes drew the scrap of parchment from his pocket and held it close to the lantern's dim flame. "Observe the ink, Watson. Brown iron gall, brittle at the edges, at least 20 years old, yet the handwriting is firm." "It might have been left there since the partnership days," I suggested. He nodded slightly. "Indeed, but then who replaced the plaster? Someone preserved the secret even while pretending to bury it." I leaned forward. "You think this was deliberate concealment rather than coincidence?" "Coincidence is the refuge of the incurious," Holmes replied. "No, this message was meant to survive. Someone wished to be found, perhaps not alive, but found nonetheless. The wheels rattled against the stones. I noticed his fingers tapping absently, 3 precise beats against his knee, the same rhythm that haunted Hearn's wall. Back at Baker Street, he spread the parchment upon the table under full lamplight. His magnifying glass caught the ink's sheen. Notice the slight smudge at the corner. That, Watson, is recent. I bent closer. You mean the paper has been touched? Within the week, I'd wager. The hand was tremulous, perhaps in haste. Someone revisited this recess, slipped the paper to the fore, and struck those knocks to attract attention. Then the visitor we heard tonight had business with the dead, he said quietly. The hollow knocking seemed to echo anew within that sentence. I shivered. Holmes straightened abruptly. We shall call upon the local registry tomorrow and confirm the particulars of one Mr. Garrick. Meanwhile, Hearn is not to be left alone. You fear harm? I fear guilt, he answered, for it often strikes from within before it bursts without. The following morning broke grey but restless. Hearn's telegram awaited us at breakfast. Knocking resumed at dawn, more violent. Please return. Holmes read it once, folded it, and rose without another word. By the time we reached Beecham Street, a small crowd had gathered before Hearn's house, murmuring. A constable held them back. Holmes flashed his card. What has occurred? The constable rubbed his chin. Gentleman inside, sir, nearly swooned. Claims the wall moved of its own accord. We entered swiftly. Hearn stood in the hall, face ashen, his collar open. It came again, Mr. Holmes, harder than before. The cupboard door shook. I feared the whole panel would give way. Holmes examined the wall. Fine cracks radiated from the plaster like veins under strain. A pressure behind, he murmured. Not supernatural, Watson. Mechanical. He fetched a small hammer from the hearth and struck lightly at the joinery. The panel gave a hollow groan. Dust fell in thin clouds. Mr. Hearn, he said, have you any stored apparatus behind these walls? Pipes, flues, or concealed safes? Hearn shook his head helplessly. Nothing, I swear it. Then let us unveil the deceiver. Holmes motioned me to brace the lamp. He inserted a chisel, prized at the crack, and drew out a section of the panel. Behind it yawned a cavity not 3 feet deep, its floor lined with old rags and rusted metal. Upon one rag lay a contrivance of wires and springs no larger than a clock. Holmes handled it delicately. Ingenious. A weighted pendulum striking against the board in intervals, activated by this fuse of cord. Hearn's mouth fell open. Then, someone placed that thing there. Indeed, and recently. The dust upon it is minimal, and see here, the cord still smolders. Whoever set it meant to rouse you before dawn. I stared at the infernal little machine. A cruel trick, Holmes. Meant to drive the man mad. Holmes inclined his head. Cruel, but purposeful. It signaled our compliance, to lure us here once more. He turned suddenly to the window, drawing back the curtain. Watson, note the footprints upon the outer sill, mud fresh from the street. I followed his gaze. 2 distinct prints, narrow and pointed, led to the iron drain pipe. Holmes's eyes glinted. Our midnight mason climbed rather than knocked at the door. The simplest path for guilt is the shadowed one. Hearn clutched the mantle. You mean someone entered? Last night? Holmes's tone was almost gentle. Last night, or even while we spoke here. The mechanism's fuse was meant to expire as we departed. It did. A sudden, sharp sound broke from above, 3 measured blows against the ceiling. Hearn cried out. Holmes caught up the lamp. The pattern ascends. Come, Watson. We hurried to the upper landing. The noise ceased, then returned fainter, beyond a narrow door at the end. Holmes forced it open. The attic was low and bare, beams webbed with dust, but near the far wall a single board had been lifted, revealing a dark cavity between joists. Holmes knelt and drew forth a small leather case. Inside lay documents tied with string and a tarnished signet ring. He untied the bundle, scanning the top sheet. A ledger of debts, Hearn's father to one Charles Garrick, unpaid, concealed, and witnessed by the son. Hearn sank upon a trunk, burying his face. My father swore those accounts were settled. Holmes regarded him steadily, yet here is proof they were not. The message "I am here" was Garrick's posthumous claim, but the hand that revived it last night was living. Who then? The one who profits by unearthing the old wrong. Tell me, Mr. Hearn, who stands to gain from your disgrace? He hesitated, then whispered, My clerk, Evan Gell. He knew of my father's affairs. I dismissed him last month. Holmes nodded slowly. Then expect his return. The next knock may not be upon the wall, but upon your conscience. At that moment, faint yet distinct, came a single rap from below, measured, deliberate, echoing through the timbers like a reminder. Holmes's eyes met mine. The wall has ceased to lie, Watson, he said softly. Now the man must speak. Holmes's words had scarcely left his lips when the knock came again. Two quick, one slow, precisely inverted from the rhythm before. He turned his head sharply, his eyes gleaming. Reverse pattern, he said. A signal answered. Hearn clung to the banister. From whom? From the man you dismissed, Holmes replied, moving toward the stairs. Gell wishes to know whether his device performed. He's near enough to hear it. I followed as Holmes descended. The sound persisted faintly, as though someone tapped from the outer garden. Holmes halted midway, listening. You see, Watson, the message changes from call to response. A code between two accomplices, one inside, one out. We stepped into the narrow yard. Fog clung low against the ground, muting the lamplight. From beyond the wall came a scrape, then the same 3 taps, slow and deliberate. Holmes's hand went up. Wait for it. A shadow moved behind the garden gate. Holmes sprang forward, wrenched it open, and caught a figure by the sleeve. There was a short struggle, the scrape of boots on stone, and then the man stood revealed. Mud-smeared, trembling, his collar torn. Evan Gell, I presume, said Holmes. The clerk's eyes darted wildly. You've no right. None. I only came for what was mine. What was yours? Holmes's tone was cuttingly calm. A partnership share unpaid, or a ghost's revenge unpaid. Gell tried to wrench free, but Holmes held him fast. You set that device, I said. You frightened your employer half to death. I only meant him to confess, Gell cried. The old man cheated my father, Garrick. Everyone knew it but him. I found the papers. I heard the whispers in that wall, and I thought, if the house itself accused him, he would pay. Hearn had come to the threshold, white-faced. You fool! You nearly ruined me. Ruined? Gell spat the word. You lived on what was stolen from mine. Holmes tightened his grip. Gentlemen, your moral accounts can wait. Mr. Gell, the law concerns itself less with ghosts than with mechanical contrivances designed to terrorize. You will accompany me. The man sagged in defeat. It was only to frighten him, he muttered. The knocking, the whisper through the vent. I fed it with wire from next door, his father's old wall still hollow. Holmes's gaze sharpened. Then you had access to the adjoining house, the one for let. How? Gell hesitated. I rent the cellar by week for my work in chemicals. The agent never asked questions. Chemicals, Holmes repeated softly. And were these involved in the fuses of your little toy? Gell's silence was answer enough. Holmes sighed. An experiment of vengeance conducted by amateur hands. One spark from tragedy. Watson, the constable. While I fetched the policeman from the street, Holmes examined the wall's base. The cavity runs the length of both houses, he murmured. A perfect conduit for sound. One whisper becomes another's nightmare. When Gell was taken, Hearn collapsed into a chair. Then it is ended. The wall will be silent now. Holmes regarded him gravely. Walls remember, Mr. Hearn. Their silence may accuse louder than speech. He drew from his pocket the parchment again and placed it upon the desk. This, however, does not belong to Gell. It was older by decades. Look closer. See the faint watermark. I bent over. Through the brittle sheet ran a thread-like emblem, a coiled serpent surrounding the letters T.H. Hearn's breath caught. My father's mark. Precisely, said Holmes. The note's author was not Garrick, but your father himself. The phrase "I am here" was no confession. It was concealment. He left his own trace behind the wall he built. Hearn stared in disbelief. You mean he hid something more? Something he feared discovered, Holmes replied. Garrick's ledger revealed only debt, but debt is rarely the only sin of commerce. He tapped the cupboard's back panel again. The hollow tone was unmistakable. Behind this partition, Watson, lies the truth that drove one man to suicide and another to theft of justice. Fetch the screwdriver. Within minutes, the panel came away. From the recess, Holmes drew a narrow tin box, tarnished and bound with wire. Inside were small bars of dull yellow metal. Gold, I breathed. Hearn's voice was scarcely audible. My father's hoard? Holmes replaced the lid. Stolen, perhaps, from the partnership before Garrick's death. He feared discovery, so he built a wall to protect his guilt and signed it with an echo. Hearn covered his face. I had thought the house haunted by another man's spirit. It was my family's shame all along. Holmes touched his shoulder gently. Ghosts are only the conscience given sound, Mr. Hearn. Your wall merely remembered what you preferred, forgotten. Outside, the constable's boots rang upon the steps as Gell was led away. Holmes stood by the open cupboard, listening. Do you hear it, Watson? I listened. The air was still. Nothing. Exactly, he said softly. Silence, true silence, is the rarest witness of all. Hearn drew a long breath. Then it is over. Holmes shook his head. Not entirely. The past does not yield so easily. We shall pay one more visit to the registry. The dates of death may not align as you think. Before I could ask his meaning, a sudden, faint tap came again, from the floor beneath the desk, not the wall. Holmes's eyes gleamed. The house, he murmured, has one confession yet to make. Holmes was already kneeling beside the desk, his ear pressed against the boards. The faint tap repeated, slow, measured and hollow as though from the void beneath the floor. Below, not behind, murmured, the voice of what lies under the house. Hearn's whisper came tight with dread. Surely that can only be pipes or rats. Rats seldom count their knocks, Mr. Hearn, Holmes said evenly. Fetch me that candle. He took the taper, lowered it to the gap between floorboards, and watched the flame bend inward. Ah, an air current, a concealed vent, perhaps a shaft. The same craftsman who sealed the wall left this as insurance. With a flick of his knife, he prized up the loosened plank. A gust of cold air rose from the darkness, carrying the damp scent of earth and something metallic. Holmes held the lantern closer. There is a void, timbers leading downward. A storage pit or a forgotten cellar. Watson, your revolver, if you please. Hearn trembled. Must we go down there? Holmes gave a faint smile. If the past insists on speaking, we must at least hear it out. He slid into the narrow opening first, boots scraping against a wooden ladder that creaked under his weight. I followed, my lantern casting trembling shadows over stone. Beneath us spread a small, low chamber, the ceiling blackened with soot. In its center stood a workbench covered with tarnished instruments, scales, bottles, fragments of gold leaf, and a single bell jar clouded with dust. Holmes approached it slowly. Beneath the jar lay a locket, its chain twisted, its glass cracked. He lifted the cover and turned the locket toward the light. Inside was the portrait of a young man, earnest, sharp-eyed, perhaps no more than 30. The back was engraved C.G. "Charles Garrick," I breathed. Hearn's voice wavered from above. "Then my father hid even this?" Holmes nodded. "A memento, kept not from affection, but remorse. Garrick's death was not by misfortune, Watson. It was silenced beneath this floor." He drew his fingers along the wall. "Observe these markings. Fresh cuts, shallow, as if someone recently searched here. Gell again, hunting proof to condemn the Hearn name." From the far end of the cellar came another knock. Sharp, single, echoing off the stone. Holmes froze. Not wind, that was struck by hand. I turned the light that way. Between the mortar lines gleamed a faint thread of wire. Holmes grasped it, followed its trail, and uncovered a second contrivance, simpler than the first, yet newly placed. "Another device," he murmured. "This one timed by heat rather than fuse." Before I could question, a faint hiss sounded, followed by a spark within the mechanism. Holmes dropped it instantly. A puff of acrid smoke rose, filling the chamber with the scent of sulfur. "Quickly, Watson, up!" We scrambled back through the hatch, coughing. The smoke curled through the study like a grey ribbon. Hearn staggered back from the opening. Holmes shut the plank with his heel and pressed his sleeve over his mouth. A chemical ignition, harmless now but meant to startle or destroy evidence. Our Mr. Gell is a resourceful chemist. Hearn looked between us in horror. "He meant to burn the proof?" "Or conceal it forever," Holmes said. "But his carelessness has granted us more. The air current through that vent? Watson, did you notice its direction?" "It flowed inward," I replied. "Exactly. Air drawn downward means there is an exit lower still, perhaps an old smelting drain from the workshop days. If so, Gell could move unseen beneath both houses." Hearn clutched the mantel for support. "Then even now he may watch," Holmes finished quietly. A faint sound drifted from the garden window. Tap, tap, tap. The rhythm was softer now, almost plaintive. Holmes extinguished the lamp. "Do not speak." Through the darkness, a silhouette passed the frosted pane. A man crouched low, testing the shutter with gloved fingers. Holmes's whisper brushed my ear. He returns for what he failed to erase. In a motion swift as breath, Holmes flung open the sash. The intruder leapt back, but Holmes's arm shot out, seizing his wrist. "The game is over, Gell." The clerk's eyes blazed in the half-light. "You think you've won, but you know nothing of what lies beneath." Holmes's grip held. "Then enlighten us." Gell struggled fiercely, the knocking sound rising again from the floor as though the house itself echoed his resistance. "It's not guilt, it's warning. You fools. There's a vault under that wall, a fire set to clear the debt of every lie." Holmes flung him toward me. "Watson, restrain him." I caught the man by the arm. He writhed, shouting, "You'll burn before dawn if it's not stopped." Holmes turned to Hearn. "Your cellar key, now." We tore open the lower door again. A dull orange glow flickered far below, the smoke thickening. Holmes descended 3 rungs before calling up sharply, "The fuse leads to a drum of oil. Gell's final confession is combustion." He yanked the smoldering wire free, twisting it out with bare hands. Sparks died with a hiss. A silence fell, vast and heavy, broken only by the labored breathing of the 3 men. Holmes climbed out, wiping soot from his cuffs. "Watson, note this for your chronicle. Vengeance seeks justice but achieves only repetition. Mr. Hearn, your wall has now spoken its last." Hearn sank to his knees beside the sealed plank. "I never knew. I swear it." "I believe you," Holmes said gently. "And yet belief does not absolve inheritance. The gold shall go to restitution, the rest to history." He turned to the constable arriving breathless at the door. "Take this man. He's more fool than villain." As Gell was led away, The house seemed to exhale. The boards creaked once, then stillness reigned. Holmes looked at me and listened a long moment. "Do you hear it, Watson?" I strained my ears. Nothing but the faint drip of water beneath. "No," I said at last. He nodded. "Precisely. Every case ends with silence, but this one's is earned." Then, from the depth below, there came one final knock, slow, solitary, and resonant, as though the earth itself acknowledged the truth. Holmes's eyes glimmered in the dimness. "Or perhaps," he murmured, "not quite yet." Holmes's eyes remained fixed upon the floorboards from which that solitary knock had come. He did not move for a long moment, merely raised a hand for silence. The house itself seemed to hold its breath. Then, softly, "That was no echo. Someone or something still stirs beneath." Hearn's composure faltered. "But the cellar is sealed. You extinguished the fuse yourself." Holmes crouched, pressing his fingertips to the boards as if feeling for a pulse. "Heat travels upward, Mr. Hearn. So, too, does sound. The vibration came not from the chamber we saw, but from a deeper conduit. Your father was thorough. He built 2 levels to his deception." He turned to me sharply. "Watson, lantern." I fetched it, my heart still thudding from the last fright. Holmes relit the taper, then drew from his pocket a length of twine and a small metal weight. "Let us confirm the depth." He lowered the line through the narrow vent we had opened earlier. For several seconds there was only silence. Then the faint clink of metal striking stone far below. Holmes measured the length between his fingers. 8 feet beyond the cellar floor, a hidden sub-cellar. Hearn stared in disbelief. "Impossible. My father, he would never—" "On the contrary," said Holmes, "he already did. He buried both gold and gilt. It remains to see what else." He straightened, determination sharpening his profile. "Watson, bring rope. We descend once more." I hesitated. "After that last fuse, are you certain it's safe?" "Safer than ignorance," he replied. Within minutes, we had pried up the boards anew. Holmes secured the rope to a beam and slipped into the darkness, his lantern swaying like a small planet below me. I followed, boots finding uncertain purchase until we reached a rough stone floor, damp and cold. The air hung heavy, saturated with age. "Remarkable," he murmured. "You see the brickwork? Older than the house itself, perhaps remnants of an 18th century foundry." He raised the lantern higher. The walls glimmered with moisture, revealing alcoves carved into the stone. In one of them stood a wooden chest, its lid warped, a lock corroded to dust. Holmes brushed aside cobwebs, then forced it open with his knife. Inside lay stacks of paper, contracts, receipts, ledgers, all bearing the same looping hand and the same watermark. The coiled serpent, T.H. Hearn's breath caught. My father's ledgers. He kept them all down here. "Indeed," Holmes said, flipping through a page. "And note the final entries. Transactions to a name repeated with increasing frequency. C. Garrick. The sums grow smaller toward the end, suggesting repayment or coercion." "Coercion," I echoed. Holmes tapped the margin. Each figure accompanied by a single initial E. An intermediary. Someone pressing both men. Possibly Evan Gell's father before him. Thus guilt becomes inheritance. A faint drip punctuated his words, followed by that unmistakable knock, closer now, from the far wall. Holmes's eyes gleamed. "There it is again. Listen to its timbre. Not wood this time, but iron." We moved toward the sound. Beneath a layer of grime, half buried in soil, jutted the curve of a small iron door no larger than a crate lid. Holmes cleared the debris, then grasped the handle. It resisted, then gave way with a sigh of stale air. Within lay a single object, a narrow coffin-like box lined with velvet. Holmes lifted the lid. Inside, perfectly preserved, despite the damp, rested the skeleton of a small dog, its skull bearing a collar engraved "For Loyalty Unbought." Hearn recoiled. "What ghastly relic is this?" Holmes's voice softened. "Not ghastly, symbolic. The faithful hound buried with its master's secret. Your father kept this creature near him in life. In death, he sealed it with the ledger of his deceit. Sentiment and guilt intertwined." He replaced the lid gently. "The knocking we heard, metal against stone, was caused by the shifting of this door through changes in temperature. A mechanical ghost. Yet notice, Watson, how precisely it imitated intention." I exhaled, half in relief, half in awe. Then the mystery is physical after all. "Physical, yes," he said. "But not merely so. Every vibration we followed was the pulse of conscience transmitted through matter." Holmes extinguished the lantern, letting the dark enfold us. "Listen again." For a moment, all was still. Then, faintly, a new rhythm emerged. Tap, 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 tap. A triplet, irregular yet deliberate. Holmes drew a sharp breath. "That pattern is recent. The first belonged to the wall, the second to the device. This is human." He raised the light once more. From behind the opposite wall, the faint scrape of shifting stone echoed. Hearn clutched my arm. "Someone's there." Holmes was already at the wall, examining a fissure where the mortar had crumbled. "A tunnel. Narrow but passable. It runs toward the adjoining house." Before he could continue, a voice, muffled, desperate, filtered through the crack. "Help! For God's sake, help me!" Hearn's face went ashen. "That voice, I know it." "Gell?" I gasped. Holmes nodded grimly. So the constable's custody proved as fragile as his contrition. "Quick, Watson, widen the gap." We clawed away the loose mortar until a hole appeared. The lantern's glow spilled through, revealing a cramped passage. At its end lay Gell himself, pale and gasping, one hand clutching his leg where a beam had pinned him. He saw Holmes and gave a broken laugh. "It's fitting, isn't it? The house won't let me leave." Holmes crouched beside him. "You returned to destroy the rest of the ledgers." "I tried," Gell whispered. "But the floor gave way. I fell. Heard knocking all around me. Thought it was Garrick's ghost come for me." Holmes examined the wound quickly. "Nothing fatal. Watson, assist me." As we freed him, a distant rumble trembled through the stone, followed by a long, echoing boom from above. Dust rained from the ceiling. Hearn cried out, "What was that?" Holmes's face tightened. "The chemical residue we left in the cellar, heated by the lamp's fall. The fire we thought extinguished may yet live." A growing roar answered him, the air thick with smoke and the faint staccato of collapsing beams, like 1,000 hollow knocks blending into one. Holmes grasped my shoulder. "Up, Watson, now. The house is answering its own sin with flame." We half carried, half dragged Gell toward the ladder as the walls shuddered and the darkness filled with burning sound. The roar above us deepened into a living thing, its thunder rolling through the beams as sparks began to drift down the shaft like malignant fireflies. Holmes shoved me upward first, shouting over the din, "Watson, take his arm! Don't let him slip!" I caught Gell beneath the shoulders while Holmes braced him from below. The man was half conscious, mumbling in fevered tones. "I only wanted the truth to be heard." Holmes's voice cut through the smoke. "Then listen to it now, man. The house itself cries it aloud." We burst through the cellar hatch into choking heat. Flames licked along the wall panels, feeding hungrily on the old timber. Hearn staggered forward from the doorway, face ghost-white in the firelight. "Holmes, the stairs! They're gone!" "Then the window!" Holmes barked. "Quickly!" We dragged Gell toward the study window, shattering the glass with a chair leg. Cool air rushed in, momentarily clearing the smoke. Holmes thrust Gell outward first into the waiting arms of a constable below, then turned to Hearn. Out, man! Move! Hearn hesitated, his gaze fixed on the cupboard where the tin box of gold still gleamed amid the fire. The gold. Holmes seized him by the collar. Would you add your soul to its ledger? Out. I pushed from behind, and together we tumbled into the garden just as the roof above let out a scream of rending wood. A fountain of sparks exploded into the night sky, showering the lane in amber rain. The constables dragged us clear of the falling debris. One of them pointed upward. The whole upper floor's ablaze, sir. Holmes, coughing violently, forced himself upright. Let it burn. A house cannot atone except through ruin. Hearn sank onto the grass, his hands trembling as he watched the inferno devour his inheritance. It's all gone. My father's work, his name, everything. Holmes looked down at him. Better ashes than lies, Mr. Hearn. Clean end is sometimes the most merciful beginning. Through the crackle of flame came a strange, rhythmic sound, the collapsing beams inside striking each other in threefold cadence. Knock, knock, knock. The pattern that had haunted us since Baker Street, now beating its own requiem. Holmes listened, expression unreadable. Even in destruction, the pattern persists, he murmured. The conscience of matter, Watson. It will repeat until silence has learned its lesson. The fire brigade arrived with shouting and steam. As the hoses hissed, Holmes motioned me aside, drawing from his coat a charred scrap of paper. This fell from the chest before the flames reached it. The fragment bore a half-scorched notation. Final debt settled, signed C.G. Holmes's eyes shone with grim satisfaction. There, you see, Garrick forgave him before death. The entire haunting, the guilt, the vengeance, built upon a lie of omission. I stared at the embered paper. Then all this horror came from what was already resolved? Not quite, he said. The truth forgave. The man did not. Tobias Hearn's father could not believe in Garrick's mercy, and thus lived imprisoned by a sin that no longer existed. It is the most tragic captivity of all, the one we lock ourselves into. A constable approached, saluting hastily. We've the clerk secure, sir. He'll live, though half-burned. Good, said Holmes. He has seen enough of hell this night. Hearn raised his head weakly. What will become of me? Holmes's tone softened. You, sir, will live, if you learn to listen without fear. The wall's voice is silenced. Now hear your own. As dawn began to pale the smoke, the fire subsided into a mass of glowing embers. Holmes stood apart, watching the ruins with folded arms. The rhythmic dripping from the charred gutters echoed faintly the old motif. Slower now, mournful rather than menacing. I joined him. Holmes, I said quietly, was the final knock below merely coincidence? Expansion of the beams, perhaps? He smiled faintly through the soot. You may call it that if you wish, Watson. Yet the timing was exquisitely human. The instant before the truth revealed itself, the earth gave its answer. I am content to leave it undefined. We watched as the firemen uncovered the last section of wall still standing. In its scorched plaster a shape had formed, 3 concentric rings around a dark center, like the mark of a giant fingerprint. Hearn saw it and shuddered. Holmes regarded it thoughtfully. Curious, the smoke itself memorializes the pattern. Even nature repeats what guilt has composed. He turned to the inspector who had arrived in haste. See that the cellar is examined after cooling. You will find remains of ledgers, a tin box of gold, and possibly a small skeleton. All evidence of the human variety of a haunting. The inspector frowned. Skeleton, sir? Holmes waved a hand. A dog, not a man. The most innocent witness of all. As we made our way back toward Baker Street, I glanced behind us once more. The house of Beecham Street was now a blackened shell, its windows like hollow eyes staring into dawn. Yet even as we turned the corner, I fancied I heard one last echo, a single hollow knock carried upon the morning wind. Holmes paused mid-step. "Do you hear it, Watson?" "I do," I admitted. He nodded slowly. "The past bidding us farewell. When walls fall, truth must find another voice." He said no more, and we walked on through the quiet streets, the sound fading until it became indistinguishable from the steady rhythm of our own footsteps. We walked in silence until Baker Street loomed through the thinning mist, its familiar facade blackened by chimney soot and dawn alike. Holmes said nothing as we climbed the stairs. The room greeted us as though holding its breath. The faint crackle from the hearth, the smell of last night's smoke still clinging to his coat. He hung it carefully upon the peg and stood a moment, listening to the faint ticking of the clock. "The same cadence," he murmured. 3 beats, a pause. "Even time remembers." I sank into my chair, exhausted. "You sound as though you mourn the sound rather than the lives entangled in it." Holmes gave a small, tired smile. "I mourn neither. I observe. But the rhythm of events, Watson, it haunts me as surely as any knocking. There is something circular in crime. Each begins where another ended." He crossed to the sideboard, poured a measure of brandy, and handed it to me before taking one himself. "You may record that in your chronicle. The case of the guest who knocked from inside, closed by fire, yet unsilenced." I looked up sharply. "Unsilenced? You still believe something remains unresolved?" He turned toward the window, eyes narrowing at the pale light beyond. "Tell me, Watson, did you note how Gell spoke of warning rather than revenge? How he cried that the house itself would burn to clear the debt? He spoke not as an inventor of guilt, but as one who discovered it too late." "You mean he found something beyond the ledgers?" Holmes nodded slowly. "A document, perhaps, or confession. Something his father concealed even from him. Garrick's death, Hearn's ruin, all consequences of a transaction yet unseen." I sighed. "And now the house is ash." "Not entirely," Holmes replied. "Ash preserves shape where paper burns. The fire brigade will deliver the remains this afternoon for inspection. I wish to know what the flames spared." He stood motionless for a time, the lamplight catching the grey in his temples. "It is curious, Watson. The moral architecture of guilt. The more elaborate it grows, the more surely it collapses of its own weight." A soft tap interrupted him. It came from the window pane, delicate but distinct. Holmes turned instantly. "You heard that?" "Yes," I said, setting down my glass. "Bird, perhaps?" "Hardly." He drew the curtain aside. A young constable stood outside the fogged glass, hat in hand. Holmes opened the window. "Message for you, Mr. Holmes," the man said, passing an envelope. "Delivered by a boy claiming you'd expect it." Holmes slit the seal. Inside was a single folded sheet, singed at one corner. His eyes darkened as he read aloud. "The fire was not mine alone. Look beneath the name." He handed it to me. The hand. See how the ink bleeds unevenly? Written in haste upon rough paper. Yet the phrasing, "look beneath the name," points to substitution, an identity concealed. "You suspect Gell had an accomplice?" "I suspect," said Holmes, "that he inherited a secret he did not understand. Beneath the name may refer to Garrick's own, the initials C.G., perhaps not Charles Garrick at all." He paced the hearthrug, thoughts racing faster than speech. Consider, if Garrick forgave Hearn, why then did he fall from his landing? Accident or silence enforced. The ledger's final entry was signed C.G., but no witness confirmed the hand. "You imply the signature was forged?" Holmes's voice dropped. "Not forged, borrowed. A man conceals his act beneath another's name. Garrick's death declared suicide. The debt's buried, but if the signatory lived under false identity, then the true Garrick may not have died at all." The words struck me cold. "Holmes, are you suggesting that Garrick himself was the guest who knocked from inside?" He met my gaze steadily. Perhaps not his body, but his intent. A man buried by falsehoods may find strange ways to call the living to account. Before I could respond, the street bell clanged below. Mrs. Hudson's voice carried faintly upward, announcing, "The fire inspector, sir, has brought something you requested." Holmes motioned to me. "At last. Let us see what the ashes chose to remember." The inspector entered, a bundle under his arm wrapped in damp cloth. He placed it upon the table and unrolled it carefully. Inside lay the warped remnant of a metal plate, once part of the ledger chest. Across its surface, where the soot had etched patterns, were faint impressions of letters. Garrick and Hearn, registered 1873. But below that, scratched by a later hand, was another line barely visible. Not Garrick, guard. Holmes drew a sharp breath. "Guard? Of what?" The inspector shrugged. "Found it in the rubble near the study floor, sir. Nearly missed it." Holmes examined the etching beneath his glass. "The final illusion resolves, Watson. Garrick was no partner. He was the watchman of another's crime. Hearn's father used his name to mask the laundering of stolen funds. When Garrick discovered the deceit, he was removed, and his death branded suicide. The wall's whisper was not accusation, but warning. 'I am here.' That was Garrick's plea to be found. Innocent. I felt a chill. Then Gell avenged the wrong man. Precisely. He fought his father's phantom enemy, not knowing the true villain was long dead. Such are the tragedies bred by half-heard truth." Holmes replaced the plate and straightened. Yet one riddle endures. Who sent this note? The constable, lingering by the door, cleared his throat. "Beg pardon, sir. The boy who brought it. He said it came from a gentleman waiting outside. But when I turned to ask his name, he'd gone. Left only a sound. 3 knocks on the lamp-post." Holmes's eyes gleamed. 3 knocks. Always 3. He stepped to the window once more. The street lay empty, fog swirling around the gas lamps. Yet somewhere within that mist came the faintest echo. Knock, 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 measured, hollow, and unhurried, fading into distance as though walking away. Holmes watched until the last vibration died, then spoke quietly. "Watson, it appears our guest still keeps his own schedule." Holmes remained at the window long after the sound had vanished, his reflection a pale ghost upon the glass. The gaslight flickered across his features, revealing not triumph but unease. He spoke without turning. "Watson, we may have exorcised the wrong spirit." I looked up from the soot-stained metal plate. "You mean Garrick's innocence changes the nature of the haunting?" "It changes the direction of its echo," he replied. "For every false accusation, there is a counterweight of truth that seeks balance. Someone, alive, wishes us to continue hearing it." He closed the curtain and moved to his desk, where he began pacing with the restless energy that marked his mind at full flight. "Consider the sequence. First, the mechanical knocks from the device, then the living voice through the wall, and now this posthumous message delivered by a stranger who vanishes in fog. The pattern repeats, but with increasing intelligence. This latest signal required forethought." I frowned. A man could imitate the knocking easily enough. Yes, but could he imitate timing? Each recurrence arrives precisely when revelation threatens to stagnate. That, Watson, is orchestration. We are not being haunted. We are being guided. Guided by whom? "That," said Holmes, "is the final question." He sat abruptly, steepling his fingers. "If Garrick died innocent and Gell avenged him in error, then who benefits from sustaining the myth of guilt? Who keeps the knock alive?" Before I could answer, there came another sound, 3 soft raps upon our own door. Holmes's gaze sharpened. "Enter." The door opened to admit Inspector Lestrade, his thin face drawn by cold. "Evening, Mr. Holmes. I hear you've been chasing echoes. Thought you'd want to see this." He produced a small envelope, smoke-smudged like the previous one. Holmes examined it without touching. "Found where?" "In the cell where we were holding that. Clerk, Gell." He asked for paper this morning, wrote a few lines, then collapsed. Dead before the doctor arrived. Fumes from his burns, they said. Holmes's expression darkened. And the note? Lestrade handed it over. You'd best read it. Holmes unfolded the sheet. The writing was shaky but legible. The knocking never came from me. He told me when to start and when to stop. Look to the man who sold the match. The man who sold the match, Holmes repeated softly. Curious phrasing. I leaned closer. Could he mean the fire, the man who provided the chemicals? Holmes nodded. Precisely. Someone supplied Gell with the means and convinced him of moral justification, that someone remains at liberty. Lestrade shifted uncomfortably. Any notion who it might be? Holmes tapped the paper. Not yet. But the signature. Note the flourish beneath the name. Lestrade squinted. Looks like an H, or perhaps an I. Or both, said Holmes, as in Isaac Hearn, the son of the man who built the wall. Lestrade whistled softly. You think the son helped the clerk terrorize his own father. I think the sins of one generation are rarely content to lie dormant in the next. Holmes turned to me. Watson, recall Hearn's words during the fire. My father's work, his name, everything. That lament contained envy as much as despair. He inherits not guilt alone, but opportunity. I stared at him. Then the young Hearn continued what his father began. Worse, Holmes replied. He monetized it. The estate's insurance, the salvage of the gold, the sympathy of the town, all accruing to him once the scandal consumed both Gell and the elder Hearn. The perfect inheritance. Purified wealth. Lestrade exhaled. I'll have men on him before nightfall. Holmes raised a hand. Caution. He will expect pursuit. Our quarry is methodical. Remember, the knocks followed rhythm. He conducts events like a symphony. If he believes the fire ended suspicion, he may soon attempt a final movement. Lestrade frowned. You mean another crime? Holmes's tone was grave. A closing note to silence the pattern forever. Lestrade departed at once. Holmes remained standing, head bowed, listening. I could hear nothing but the faint hiss of the gas jet. Then, faintly, from somewhere deep within the building, came 3 measured taps. Steady, deliberate, impossibly familiar. Holmes looked up. You hear it too, Watson? I nodded, my heart tightening. From the hall? No, he said, from beneath. He crossed swiftly to the hearth and knelt, ear against the floorboards. Same rhythm, same spacing. Someone has entered the basement. Mrs. Hudson's storeroom. Empty at this hour, Holmes interrupted. Fetch a revolver. We descended the narrow stairs, our footsteps echoing against stone. The knocking grew louder, resonating through the pipes like a drumbeat, beneath our feet. At the base of the steps, Holmes motioned me to halt. He drew back the latch of the cellar door and flung it open. A single lantern burned upon a crate, casting huge, restless shadows along the walls. In its glow stood a figure, tall, composed, and unmistakably familiar. Mr. Isaac Hearn, Holmes said calmly. The young man inclined his head. You are prompt as ever, Mr. Holmes. I wondered which would reach you first, the note or the sound. Holmes stepped closer. You chose a singular method of confession. Confession? Hearn smiled faintly. No, sir. Demonstration. My father built walls to hide guilt. I build echoes to reveal it. You built echoes, Holmes repeated. You mean you orchestrated all the knocks, the messages to the clerk, the fire, even tonight's summons? Hearn's eyes gleamed. Every beat precisely timed. Gell was my instrument, you my witness. Only through repetition can truth resound. Truth, I said sharply. You burned a house and killed a man. Hearn turned toward me, his voice eerily calm. Then the house was guilty, and the man already dead to conscience. Holmes's voice cut through the tension like steel. And what of your own conscience, sir? Does it not knock within you even now?" For the first time the young man's expression faltered. He pressed a hand to his breast as though listening to something within. "It does," he whispered, "always 3 times. Then, from somewhere behind him, came the echo again, knock, 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 not from the walls, but from within the wooden crate upon which the lantern rested. Holmes's eyes flashed. "Watson, quickly!" He lunged forward, seizing the lantern, while I tore open the crate lid. Inside lay a small clockwork mechanism wired to a glass vial. The second hand trembled near its mark. Holmes shouted, "Out, now!" We ran for the stairs as the vial shattered behind us, releasing a hiss that rose like a scream through the cellar. The hiss rose to a shriek as the chemical gas met the open air, curling upward like a living serpent. Holmes slammed the door behind us and thrust me toward the staircase. "Run, Watson! It's chloroform vapor mixed with phosphorus!" We burst into the hall, coughing as the fumes followed. Holmes seized a window latch, flung it wide, and leaned out, shouting down the stairwell, "Lestrade, clear the building, now!" Boots thundered below as the inspector's men scattered. The vapor rolled through the corridor, luminous in the lamplight like a spectral fog. Beneath the din, I heard it again. 3 hollow knocks from the cellar, slow and deliberate, though the mechanism lay shattered. Holmes froze mid-stride. "Still knocking," he whispered. "Then someone is alive down there." I caught his arm. "Holmes, you'll suffocate." He tore free. "A life may yet be saved, Watson. Follow if you dare." Without another word, he vanished back, through the smoke. I cursed aloud and plunged after him, tying my scarf across my mouth. The air stung with phosphorus. Every breath burned. Holmes was crouched beside the fallen lantern, the light dim and quivering. Through the fumes, I glimpsed Isaac Hearn sprawled near the crate, coughing violently, his hand clutching a brass cylinder that still emitted faint rhythmic clicks. Holmes bent over him. "You fool, you nearly killed us all." Hearn's lips curved in a delirious smile. "It had to end, Mr. Holmes. The sound won't stop until it finds the last listener." "Then stop listening," Holmes snapped, wrenching the cylinder away. He twisted its cap, and the knocking ceased mid-beat. "There, the echo is yours no longer." Hearn sagged against the wall, half-conscious. "Do you hear it still?" he whispered. Holmes's voice softened. "I hear the beating of a man's heart, sir. That is all that remains of your ghost." Together we dragged him toward the steps. Each motion sent fresh waves of smoke swirling around us. When at last we reached the open air, Lestrade was waiting with his men, drenched from hauling water buckets. Holmes collapsed onto the cobbles, his face pale but steady. "Get him to the yard, Lestrade. He will need confinement more than care." The inspector glanced toward the gaping doorway. "And you, sir?" Holmes coughed once, waving him off. "I have the answer I came for. Let the walls keep the rest." As the constables carried Hearn away, the dawn light bled over the rooftops, thin and silver. Holmes rose slowly, brushing soot from his sleeve. "Watson, observe the irony. The man who sought to awaken guilt has silenced himself instead." I looked back toward the cellar entrance. "Then the mystery is ended?" He gave a faint, rueful smile. "No mystery ever ends, my dear fellow. It merely changes its voice. We followed a sound until it led us to conscience. Yet somewhere, in some other house, another heartbeat begins." He took a deep breath, wincing as his lungs protested. "Still, the case of the guest who knocked from inside is finished." I glanced at him. "You mean to write it so?" "I leave that to you, Watson," he said quietly. "Only omit one detail." "What detail is that?" "That when I closed the cylinder, I felt it pulse once more. 3 faint taps within my hand. A chill passed through me." "You believe it was mechanism?" Holmes met my eyes. "I believe nothing, but for the briefest instant, the rhythm matched my own pulse precisely." He turned away, staring toward the rising sun. Perhaps every investigator builds his own echo in time. One day you will hear mine as I have heard theirs. We stood together in silence, the city waking around us. From some distant street, a milk cart rumbled. A slow, hollow rhythm, the sound of ordinary life reclaiming its day. Yet as we turned for Baker Street, that same pattern of three seemed to accompany our steps upon the pavement. Knock, knock, knock. Not haunting now, but rhythmic, human, and final. Holmes drew in a long breath. Listen well, Watson. That is the truest sound in the world, the one that continues when all others have ceased. I nodded, and together we walked on, the beat fading into the heartbeat of London itself. We reached Baker Street in silence, the rhythm of our steps faintly echoing the triplet that had followed us from Beecham Street. Holmes hung his hat with mechanical precision, as if every motion steadied the chaos of thought still turning in his mind. When at last he spoke, his tone was quiet, but iron-clear. Watson, the sound has ceased, but not the pattern. We have excised its instrument, not its origin. I sank into my chair. Origin. The house is destroyed, Hearn under custody, and Gell dead. What more remains? Holmes's eyes flashed. Intention remains. The first blow of a hammer carries the last echo of its craftsman. I cannot rest while that rhythm beats unanswered. He crossed to the table, retrieving the scorched brass cylinder from his pocket. It lay dull and inert in the lamplight. He tapped it gently, once, twice, thrice. The sound was hollow, metallic, yet not dead. You recall, Watson, that moment when I felt it pulse in my hand. I believe now it was no mere mechanical aftershock. The design was cleverer than we supposed. I leaned forward. You think the mechanism held a second device? Holmes smiled thinly. Precisely. Observe this seam along the base. A double chamber. The lower contains a coil, not of spring, but of magnetized wire. He fetched his screwdriver, pried the base apart, and exposed the interior. A fine wire, blackened yet intact, coiled around a fragment of steel shaped almost like a tuning fork. An electro-acoustic resonator, he said softly. The source of the phantom pulse. Isaac Hearn had built not merely an explosive, but a messenger. The vibrations were calibrated to respond to a specific frequency, one produced by his own heartbeat. I stared at him. Then the knocking we heard in the cellar was his own pulse, amplified and thrown back by the walls. Holmes finished. The entire symphony of guilt, conducted by a living metronome. Every repetition was his body, reminding him what his conscience refused to silence. The idea struck me with a grim fascination. He turned his heartbeat into a haunting. Holmes nodded slowly. He wished to prove that guilt can be made audible. Yet as with all experiments of obsession, the subject became its victim. He set the cylinder upon the table. The faintest tremor shivered through it as it cooled, producing a muted tick. Tick. Tick, he regarded it with a scientist's melancholy. Even now, the metal remembers him. A sharp knock interrupted us. 3 brisk raps at the door. Holmes raised an eyebrow. The inspector, no doubt. Come in. Lestrade entered, cap in, hand, his expression subdued. Hearn's dead, Mr. Holmes. Holmes's posture stiffened. When? Half an hour ago, poison by the doctor's reckoning, something hidden in his ring. Holmes closed his eyes briefly. Then the echo has at last consumed its maker. Lestrade shifted uneasily. There's something else, sir. Before he went, he kept murmuring one phrase. Tell Holmes to listen. Meant anything to you? Holmes's gaze drifted to the cylinder. More than you imagine, Inspector. Lestrade nodded awkwardly, muttered his farewells, and withdrew. When the door had closed, Holmes remained still for a long time. The lamplight flickered upon his face, casting lines of fatigue that no triumph could soften. Listen, he murmured, almost to himself. He invites me to share the sound that damned him. Surely, Holmes, I protested, you have nothing to gain by courting madness. He gave a short laugh. Madness? No, Watson, understanding. There is a point at which logic must descend into the pit if it would illuminate the dark. He took a small phonograph disc from his drawer and wound the machine. This, he said, is the cylinder's twin. The police retrieved it from Hearn's pocket. It may contain the record of his final experiment. He placed the needle and stepped back. A low hum filled the room, followed by the unmistakable rhythm. 3 knocks, a pause, then 3 more. The sound was hollow, intimate, almost human. Then a voice, Hearn's, faint, labored. Every guilt has its echo. When the knocking stops, I shall be gone. Holmes reached forward and stopped the needle with a sharp flick. The silence that followed was immense. Watson, he said quietly, there are moments when reason hears too much. This is one. I could think of nothing to reply. The cylinder on the table gave a final cooling pop, like a dying ember. Holmes turned toward the window, the dawn just beginning to silver the curtains. You see, the tragedy of Isaac Hearn was not madness, but fidelity. He built his own conscience so precisely that it killed him when it fell out of rhythm with truth. He proved in the end that morality, like sound, cannot exist in vacuum. It needs air, friction, imperfection, life. He sank into his chair, head resting against the back, the faint ghost of a smile touching his lips. He sought purity and found silence. I studied him in the half-light, his eyes half-closed, the cylinder between us still faintly warm. In that moment, I understood the depth of his compassion, though he would never name it. For Holmes, every crime was a misplayed note in the grand composition of human reason, and his task, always, was to tune it back to harmony. I rose quietly and crossed to the window. The city stirred below, its own unending rhythm beginning anew, the hooves, the carts, the vendors calling through the fog. And then, as if in response, a sound within the room, knock, knock, knock. I turned sharply. Holmes had not moved. The cylinder on the table rolled once, came to rest against his glass, and fell silent. Holmes, I whispered, did you hear? He opened one eye, the faintest glimmer of amusement there. Yes, Watson, but this time, let it knock. It is merely London waking. He closed his eyes again, the firelight soft upon his features. For a long while I stood watching him, man and machine both stilled at last, until the morning sounds folded over that final echo and carried it into day.